Hi, my name is Isaac Paulino, and my thesis is about psychological pressures caused by invisible disabilities and societal aid for people with invisible disabilities. 13,707,200 people across the United States have medical conditions that you can't see. That's nearly 1 in 25 people. Around 4,751 of these people committed suicide in the year 2019 alone. These people have invisible disabilities. My experience with an invisible disability has led me to research the psychological aspects of invisible disabilities and the effects on people in relation to a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I argue that to mitigate invisible disability pressure, society should raise invisible disability awareness and respect and provide basic and necessary accommodations. What is a disability? According to the CDC, quote, a disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. Visible disabilities, including paralyzation, amputation, and blindness, are simple to identify because there are visual cues that indicate the disability. Invisible disabilities are a subset of disabilities that are not immediately apparent to others, providing little to no visual cues. Some invisible disabilities include, but are not limited to, chronic diseases, dyslexia, autism, Crohn's disease, ADHD, chronic pain, and impairments to the senses. I have an invisible disability called ocular palsies. Ocular palsies impairs my ability to read, write, see in bright conditions, see in dark conditions, watch movies, play sports, drive, and use depth perception. Basically anything you use your eyes for. I have 3 invisible visual impairments caused by this, and over the next few slides, I will show some images and animations that depict these conditions. The first condition is defective saccadic eye movement. It is jittery eye motion caused by weak muscles in the eye. This makes words appear like they're moving and spaces seem to connect and form patterns. This moving text, although slightly exaggerated, represents the motion of text from my point of view. The curve represents the path of a baseball flying through the air. For an able-sighted person, the ball is visible at all points because the eyes are able to track it smoothly. For me, the path looks a little bit more like on the right. I see a ball moving along a choppy path in and out of my vision. These impairments make reading and sports tiresome. Fusion with defective stereopsis causes ineffective depth perception. My eyes refuse to see at one particular distance, which creates problems while estimating the distance between faraway objects like cars and reading text, which is doubled, as seen here on the right. Lastly, precessive accommodation prevents the eyes from quickly switching focus from close to faraway objects and vice versa, making note-taking a slow and arduous process. Just like the text here on the right, my vision slowly fades into focus. Although my invisible disability is treatable and now mostly defined within clinical standards, my disability is not completely alleviated. I have to face these impairments every day to reach relatively unimpressive accomplishments for people with normal sight, like catching a baseball or taking a literature test. In my experience, I have faced several psychological pressures originating from the definition of abled. In order to understand these pressures, ableism must first be explored. Ableism is the philosophy that determines the level of ability or whether or not a person has a disability. One type of ableism is aesthetic ableism. The aesthetic philosophy proposes that people assign ability based upon visible and behavioral identifiers, including the use of sunglasses indoors and being too loud or quiet. In other words, if a person shows a sign of having a disability, such as a wheelchair or prosthetic leg, they will be viewed as disabled. This presents 2 major problems for people with invisible disabilities. First, the severity of the disability may be lower than its appearance suggests, creating unnecessary aid and misunderstandings. Secondly, a disability may lie hidden if a person is able to do basic physical activity. They are not viewed as disabled even if they have an invisible disability, making it incredibly difficult for others to acknowledge the disability and provide basic and necessary accommodations. The box method builds upon the aesthetic philosophy, using the appearance-based understanding of disabilities and a sorting method to assign ability. It argues that people assign others into boxes of disability: abled, mentally disabled, or physically disabled. Since invisible disabilities are not seen from the outside, people with these impairments are placed in the normal or abled box by default. This method does not allow for disability fluctuation or the sudden change in severity of a disability leading to different needs and accommodations. For example, one day someone with chronic pain may need a wheelchair to move, the next to cane, and the next they may be able to walk perfectly fine on their own. Fluctuation can be difficult for people without disabilities to understand, leading to the perception that a person stays in the same disability box all the time. This creates four adverse and rigid assumptions that can be made regarding a person's accommodations. The first of which, overestimation, occurs when someone provides too little accommodation for the current state of the disability. Usually this occurs if the person appears visually abled and as a result ability is overestimated, and they are required to cope with tasks outside of their ability. Underestimation happens when an onlooker provides an overwhelming number of accommodations or views a person as too weak to do tasks well within their ability. Lack of flexibility is the rigidity of accommodations that are either not sufficient or too strong for the present condition of the disability. This happens when the disability has drastically degraded or improved and the accommodations are no longer sufficient or necessary. Finally, disabilities can be boxed into one setting, such as work or school. Outside of these settings, accommodations may be viewed as unnecessary, despite the disability still existing. From the issues posed by aesthetics-based ableism arise several psychological pressures faced by people with invisible disabilities. Internal pressures are perceived by people caused by personal expectations, not in others' actions. There's an overwhelming desire in people with invisible disabilities to not require accommodations and be self-sufficient, lest they inconvenience others, which experts call the feeling of guilt. As a result, quote, much of what people experience around disability in academia is hidden up for fear of stigma and the perception of not being able to keep up. When people with these disabilities express these issues, they feel like they are constantly complaining and belittling themselves. These conversations focus on what they cannot do, rather than what they can do, masking strengths with vulnerabilities. On top of this are external pressures caused by others, like the burden of proof, in which people are forced to prove their disability because it is not naturally apparent. Some people believe that invisible disabilities are not disabilities at all, or are trivial problems when compared to other visual disabilities. Others think that people with disabilities try to cheat by using special accommodations, when in reality, these accommodations do not even close the gap between ability and disability. People think that those with invisible disabilities are, quote, being treated more favorably than others without a disability as a result of accommodations. These pressures can add up and lead to severe consequences, including depression and even suicide. The relief of the stress caused by disability pressures is necessary for a healthy mind, body, and spirit in people with invisible disabilities. However, they rarely receive adequate relief. Fortunately, there are three steps we can take to relieve psychological pressures and aid those with invisible disabilities. First, invisible disability awareness can be raised with training and education. Teachers should be trained in how to recognize basic invisible disabilities in a learning environment. For example, if someone who is normally not shy does not like to read aloud, they may have dyslexia or a vision disability. Since the teacher spends so much time with the students, they may be able to identify disabilities parents never could. Invisible disabilities are lacking in recognition because people are not educated in how to identify them. Even once diagnosed and identified, people do not know how to interact with those with invisible disabilities. For these reasons, schools should add a lesson to their middle school health classes raising invisible disability awareness. Educating yourself about invisible disabilities is crucial to understanding not only the various types of disabilities, but also accommodations and disability identification. For example, a person wearing a green lanyard with sunflower print means they have an invisible disability, as seen here on the right. Secondly, several basic accommodations could be implemented by workplaces and schools, such as presenting information in different manners. Using different methods of communication allows for people with invisible disabilities to use their abled and preferred senses. Audible communication at sidewalk allow the visually impaired to safely cross the road. Similarly, allowing for easy audiobook access and larger font for educational material would aid people like me who can see but find reading incredibly arduous and draining. For the hearing impaired, closed captions on screens, such as flight information at airports, allows for more streamlined and quick communication. Third, we can all practice behaviors that respect people with invisible disabilities, including the use of person-first speech, which emphasizes that a person with a disability is still a person. Rather than identifying someone as a disabled person, I identify them as a person with a disability, showing the disability is just a small section of their personality. For example, instead of being a visually disabled person, I'm a person with vision disability. Invisible disabilities can be embarrassing, so let the individual with the disability expose it at their own pace. Remember, invisible disabilities can take years and even a lifetime to diagnose, so an invisible disability diagnosis can be surprising and even scary. My experience with an ocular disability taught me two things. Invisible disability awareness is low, and the psychological barriers are significant. People with invisible disabilities face the burden of proof fueled by aestheticism and the misunderstood flexibility of disabilities. These viewpoints create psychological pressures which cloud the mind with disabling thoughts and stifle success. We can make a difference by raising invisible disability awareness and respect, educating ourselves, and providing basic and necessary accommodations. Most importantly, we can treat people with invisible disabilities as who they truly are, people. I would like to close with a quote from the New York Times. The strategy of personal concealment serves no advantage at all, not for the person affected, but for the employer or for a society deprived of the very real contributions people with invisible disabilities would otherwise stand to make. With your understanding and help, 13 million people in the United States can contribute their piece to society. Thank you for listening. Here are my sources.